Salutations, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. So, this video is about the Trump Ukraine scandal, just the latest in this scandal struck administration. I think people are reaching a surfeit of scandals. There's just fatigue with them, almost saturation point, which is why Trump seems to be constantly pushing back the boundaries of impunity, just getting away with more and more. So, what are the basics, in case you don't know? Anyway, so the Trump administration was trying to make some accusations against Joe Biden, the former vice president. So Joe Biden looked like the front runner for the Democratic nomination, as in he would challenge Trump for the presidency in November 2020. Actually, Biden's probably been knocked off the top spot, but he's still a serious contender. Right, so the accusation is this. Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, was working for a gas company in Ukraine. There was some investigation into the said gas company, and that the vice president didn't want things to go badly for his son. So he supposedly demanded that the Ukrainian government close that investigation, and if the Ukrainians didn't cooperate on this one, then the vice president would make sure that the United States withheld military aid from the Ukraine. Ukraine is, of course, engaged in this battle to maintain its sovereignty, to regain control of Donbass and Luhansk, which are being seized by Russia. And the Russian government won't even tell the truth about the fact that thousands of its soldiers are there. And indeed Crimea, which was stolen by Russia 5 years ago, which up until 2014, the Russian government never disputed was Ukrainian sovereign territory. Then Russia invaded. Moscow wouldn't even tell the truth about the fact it was invading, lied and lied and lied until the most absolutely flagrant, barefaced lies in public again and again before finally saying, actually, yeah, they are our troops. We did seize it. But anyway, it shows that there's not a shred of credibility for the Russian government to tell such absolute whoppers of lies for weeks. Anyway, so there was an investigation into a gas company in Ukraine that Hunter Biden was involved with. That investigation began before Hunter Biden was ever employed by that organization, and eventually the investigation was closed. So they had their funds frozen abroad, they were unfrozen, the investigation was dropped, and they decided there was no prima facie case. That was that. There's actually nothing to do with Hunter Biden. The whole thing started, as I say, before he was even ever engaged by that company. But the Trump administration was trying to do anything to find any link, however tenuous, between Joe Biden and anything that looked bad, because obviously Trump is absolutely up to his neck in unethical and illegal behavior, and has just somehow got away with it as being the Teflon Don. So as he will always turn it around. His strategy comes from the playground. I know you are, you said you are, but what am I? If you catch him doing something wrong, he will then accuse you of doing what he just did. So it really just defies logic. It's just incredible that he gets away with such outrageous behavior almost incessantly. So, and of course, Trump was accusing them of doing exactly what he was doing. So, President Trump was in contact with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and there was $400 million worth of military aid to go to the Ukraine, not money, mostly weapons provided for free by the United States. And President Trump withheld that and said, I won't send this to you until you cooperate with me on that Biden issue. So there was the telephone conversation. Was there quid pro quo offered? I know literally that's what for where, but really it means something for something. I scratch your back and you scratch my back. Okay, so Rudy Giuliani. Remember he was mayor of New York. Remember he was America's mayor. So he was called around the time of 9/11, and people said, could they change the rules, allow him to stand for a third term? But anyway, it didn't happen. And look how he's demeaned himself. He's lowered himself to being Trump's liar in chief. I mean, the guy is like he's deranged now. What a sad degeneration for a once towering figure of American politics, spoken of as a possible president. And so Giuliani goes on television, and there's nothing, no matter how ridiculous or mendacious, that he won't say if it's in defense of Donald Trump. So Giuliani's saying it was ludicrous to claim that Trump asked the Ukrainians to investigate Biden. A minute later, in the same interview, Giuliani said, "Yeah, he did ask the Ukrainians to investigate Biden." So contradicting himself, he's doing this quite a lot. I honestly wonder whether Giuliani's losing his marbles, not wishing to be impolite, but it happens to people in their 70s. Just like he'd be happy to Trump. You might think Trump is delightful. You might think he's devilish. But either way, it's quite possible, well, even likely, for a man of that age to start slowly losing his mind. In his case, I think becoming senile quite rapidly. So anyway, there's talk of impeachment in the air. A majority in the House of Representatives is for it, but Trump is not going to be removed from office. So the vote to impeach is one thing. It's only happened twice ever in the United States. They've never actually managed to remove a president. And then it go to the Senate, and you need a 2/3 majority in the Senate. It's not going to happen. Apparently, one Republican senator said that if it was a secret ballot, 30 Republican senators would vote against him. I can't verify the authenticity of that. That might be bogus, that statement. But the thing is, these Republican senators, the idea is, are too frightened of the backlash from their own constituents. That'd be at the end of their political career. Anyway, Trump reacted with the ire, which is his trademark, just like the whirligig he is, being so emotional, overreacting, opining that this whole thing is a deep state conspiracy, and yada, 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 that the liberal media are lying. Good lad, top blokes. Thanks, my fella. I wish I could change the world legally. Hello there, Brett Garside. So the evidentiary element of the whole imbroglio is not in dispute. That matter's not up for debate. Hello there, Robert Emmett. That Trump's minions went on to telly and they were lying for him, as per usual. Whirligig is what I said Trump was. Trump's lackeys were saying, "Oh, what are these outrageous imprecations? How dare you cast aspersions on Trump?" A whirligig, a very flighty and volatile person, overly emotional. I just explained to you, Robert. So these messages are flashing up on my screen. That's why there are all these asides. So noise is off from all my numerous fans. By the way, is your name really Robert Emmett? Presumably you've named yourself after the revolutionary bold lot Robert Emmett. Hark the bells tolling, I well know its meaning. Soon I shall show them, no coward am I. I'm quoting that song, the bold Robert Emmett, or the bowled Robert Emmett, I should pronounce it, in Dublinese accent. So back to Trump. That anyway, what was I going to say? So his lackeys were saying, no, don't cast aspersions on him, and how dare you impugn his ethics. Don't make me laugh. And then Trump says, actually, I did speak to the president of Ukraine about this very issue, and I did ask them to investigate Biden. So there we are. So where did these people get the idea that they should lie for Trump? I mean, presumably he ordered them to. They thought he wanted them to. His underlings, their credibility was destroyed long ago. People like Sarah Huckabee Sanders used to get up there and tell the most brazen lies for him day after day and bang on about her being so Christian and so moral. It really was nauseating, but part of a wider malaise in the Republican Party. So constantly, disseminating mistruth all the time. So he's concealing evidence set up by the political establishment, maybe. I mean, come on. I mean, I know that he wasn't in elected office till recently, but he's as establishment as he gets political establishment. That would be Democrat as well as Republican. In what sense are they set up? Was he being set up? They didn't make him speak to the president of Ukraine. They didn't make him say, please, can you find some dirt on Joe Biden? They didn't make him withhold that military aid package until Volodymyr Zelensky delivered the goods. So whatever happened to the Republican Party caring about national security? So since 2014, since Ukraine was attacked, the United States has been providing weapons for free to Ukraine. You might disagree with that policy, but that is the policy. Framed all this as the GOP and the Democrats to get rid of him. They do want to get rid of him for all sorts of reasons, but they didn't frame him. They didn't make up the evidence. It's all true. Nobody disputes that. Trump himself said that he did this. I mean, this is what the Republicans are like. When there's something which is true, no matter how absolutely incontrovertible the evidence, they will deny GOP traitors to Trump. They don't be blindly loyal to him. They're supposed to be loyal to the United States, Trump is the one who's a traitor to the United States, is always going against the national interest, who's always breaking the law, who's always breaking the Constitution. Republicans are patriots. Well, are they? Okay, put country before party. If Trump is a foreign agent, if he's trying to weaken national security, not all racist. All right, not all Republicans are racist, but it seems to be most of them are at least willing to tolerate racism. The flagrantly racist rhetoric of Donald Trump, send them back where they came from, that non-white Americans don't have a right to be in the United States. Well, if they question Trump's policies, white Americans, they can criticize him. He hates that, but he doesn't say they should be kicked out of the country. Now, why is that? Because at some level, he doesn't accept that non-whites are American. And how American is he? His mother wasn't born in the United States. Nothing wrong with that. His grandparents weren't either. Well, some African Americans, their ancestors have been there since 1619. And you look at some Hispanic Americans, some areas of the United States were Hispanic before they were Anglophone. Anyway, I digress. So the US government decided that the defense of Ukraine was important for American national security. You might not share that view, but anyway, that is US policy, and Trump was meant to be implementing that. Now, if he doesn't agree, he could say so. But he could have said that years ago. Trump isn't white, he's orange. You're right. He's an ogre, or is he an orangutan? Sorry, simians. Well, please, no more of these asides about how I'm doing. So Trump, he had his conversation with what's his name, with Volodymyr Zelensky, and the transcript they wouldn't release. They released, it was a 30-minute conversation, and they released a 4-page memo. They said it was a transcript. Lie. They later acknowledged that was not the transcript. It was way too short, even then double-spaced. So that they obviously redacted it, cut out the most controversial bits of it, presumably, and other bits that it reminds me actually rather of, the Mueller report, and they released a précis of it. Well, William Barr did, and of course it was a totally dishonest précis, telling the most outrageous lies, claiming it exonerated Trump when it didn't. When it didn't say I'm going to charge him with this crime, because Mueller didn't believe that was within his remit to do it. Why didn't Trump get rid of Mueller? Well, he was warned not to do it. It caused some sort of constitutional crisis. He was long about thinking about it. If Mueller was so bad, why didn't he get rid of him? So Trump thought the Mueller report was going to be a bombshell, but it wasn't. Why did Trump think it was going to be a bombshell? Because he knows he's guilty? And Trump has constantly removed officials who are doing their job without fear or without favour. So try to put in people who are absolutely craven, who will do his bidding. You're English, okay? Hello from Yorkshire, from Halifax. So Trump is obviously extremely ashamed of his conversation with Zelensky. Like, he's obviously ashamed of his financial situation. Release your tax returns. Every presidential candidate since John F. Kennedy's done it. I know it's not the law, but why don't you when everybody else does? What is it in there? There must be something extremely embarrassing. Mitt Romney, he delayed, he eventually caved in and did release his. And nobody complains about what they found in there now. He's so rich. He's obviously not that rich. Maybe he's been lying about that too. Just like he's told thousands upon thousands of provable lies on the record since becoming president. Anyway, so the Republican Party, if they care about national security, they should be hopping mad about this. Just like Trump, when he had meetings with Mohammed bin Salman, with Vladimir Putin, and his conversations, he kept that secret. He wouldn't even have an American official in the room with his conversation with Putin, only the Russian interpreter. Why? Because he knows it's so disgraceful, the things that are saying. Have you noticed a pattern here? He has no problem disclosing the content of his conversations with the leaders of free countries, the leaders of American allies, whether it's France, Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom, Italy, you name it, any friendly countries, he'll do that, because he's not doing dirty deals with them. But you notice how he has this fellow feeling for tyrants, for those who kill civilians on a huge scale, for those who kill journalists, for sworn enemies of the free media, for those who detest civil liberties, those who throw people in jail without trials, of totally unfair trials, those who have a cult of the personality. It is sickening that he does this. I know other US presidents have sometimes praised dictators, but Trump really takes the big biscuit. All politicians lie. Well, that's true, but Trump takes it to a new level. I realize everybody lies, myself included. Is a question of how frequently you lie and how big are your lies. Is it close to the truth? Is it an absolutely necessary lie? And he really has climbed the Everest of idiocy for telling so many provable lies. And the wholesale deglutition of these blatant lies is astounding. Everybody knows this is a cover up, exactly. And he's just so bad at cover ups, it comes out so often. So his approach to covering up a scandal seems to be to create a new, even bigger scandal. So, can you imagine if Obama had had secret conversations with Saudi Arabia? Can you imagine what the Republican media would have done? They would have gone apoplectic. This proves it. Obama is a Muslim. Remember that lie going around? Not that it would be bad if he was a Muslim, and that he's selling us out, that he founded ISIS. And Trump told that disgusting lie, accusing Obama of founding ISIS. And in that speech, then Trump said, walked it back. No, he didn't really. And he says, and then on second thoughts, well, he really did. It's jaw dropping. I can't believe this idiocy passes for political discourse these days. Anyway, the race basing people like Fox would have gone into overdrive if Obama was having secret discussions with the Saudi Arabian government. And anyway, but there's a pattern here. If it comes to tyrants, Trump will speak to them off the record. If it comes to democratic governments, he'll speak to them on the record. Why? Why is that? It's not a coincidence. This is nothing random, because he's doing things which would torpedo his presidency if they become public. Anyway, so the content must be so shocking. People would be outraged. And Trump then he says to the Russians, it's come out that he says, okay, so you interfered in our election and I don't mind. They've shown no contrition. They haven't admitted it, a bit like Trump, despite absolutely irrefutable proof of fancy bear of all these media centers in Russia. They proved that they were able to trace it back. They were really sloppy at covering their steps, at having these fake internet identities to pump out pro-Trump propaganda, do everything to undermine Hillary Clinton. You might detest Hillary Clinton, you might even like Donald J. Trump, but you can still accept, if you're a fair-minded person, the Russian government did intervene to help him, as he won by the narrowest of margins, losing the popular vote. Did this have a material effect? Did this swing the election? I think it did, because I believe it was 80,000 votes in 3 swing states. If they'd gone the other way, Hillary Clinton would have been president. Now, I despise Hillary Clinton, but she's a sane adult, which is more than can be said for Trump. So the Russians did not pay a price for this. The pushback from the US government was minimal since Trump came in. So what would they conclude? That for a tiny amount of money, they achieved a fantastic result. They've really sunk America's reputation lower than ever before. They've set Americans at their throats. They've got an absolute moron as president. You can play him like a fiddle. It's just so easy to butter him up. Just say, oh, Donald, you're so clever. And then he's putty in your hands. He's had his recruitable weaknesses, and that's what an intelligence officer would look for. That's what Putin was trained to do, that. And use someone's psychological debilities, anything that you can blackmail about them, their desire for money, whatever it is, you can get them on your side. Someone's saying, is the Republican Party guilty of gerrymandering? Yes, they are, but let's stay on topic. So it's paid huge dividends for Russia, this electoral hack. It's almost like Trump is the Manchurian candidate, if you've seen that 1950s film. So Russians would conclude, let's do it again. And Trump has invited them to do it again because it helped him win. And if it wasn't for them, he wouldn't have won. It was like a cyber 9/11. And imagine that, and imagine George W. Bush said to Osama bin Laden, okay, do it again then, that's fine, help me. So it's paid huge dividends for the Russian state. Whatever happened to the Grand Old Party speaking up for the national interest? And they used to, and remember, Congress voted that yes, there was Russian electoral interference. Okay, most Republicans voted for that. And despite all this, despite these indisputable facts, Trump claims it's a Democratic plot. I mean, what? And he's the plotter. I want to spew my guts up at this level of dishonesty. But more shocking and more dispiriting is huge numbers of people in America swallow that. Trump's popularity has never fallen below 35%, even if his economic policies are good. His dishonesty is really just off the scale. So going on to Vladimir Zelensky, He's president of the Ukraine. He's in an invidious position. He doesn't wish to be drawn into a domestic row. He needs American help because obviously Russia's got over 3 times their population, so much more wealth from oil and gas. Russia's got about 10% of their territory. Russia's got nuclear weapons. Ukraine doesn't. Ukraine reduces military forces hugely, which is why it's very vulnerable to Russian attack. Obviously, Russia will never pick on anybody its own size. And they did this. So, and then obviously the Russian government then accuses Ukraine of aggression for what? Trying to maintain their territorial integrity. A nation is allowed to suppress a rebellion. My goodness, Russia's done that in Ingushetia, in Dagestan, in Chechnya. Okay, now killing enemy combatants in a battle, that's one thing, but killing civilians is another. You should try to avoid that. And obviously the Russian military was not just not avoiding it, was deliberately doing it on a huge scale, many, many times. I know no country's record on this is perfect. The Irish army's not, and the British army's not. But the Russian army, I'm sorry to say, is one of the worst. Okay, I'm not anti-Russian. I really like some Russians. I might have got married to a Russian, and there's some Russian soldiers I thought were delightful guys. But that it's still true that the Russian army's record on human rights is abysmal. That's the plain truth. Anyway, so do we know if a word of what Trump said is true about that call? Well, I would not give him the benefit of the doubt. And he has officials like William Barr come out and tell the most despicable lies. They're just so unethical. How is that guy allowed to be a lawyer? Lawyers are supposed to have ethics. You draw the profession into disrepute, you should be out. They have to be trustworthy. And Trump has previous in his dealings with foreign rulers, particularly if Russia's involved. So there's a Ukrainian-Russian conflict, and of course Putin is lying through his teeth again, claiming his troops are not there, despite yet more absolutely unarguable proof that his soldiers are there, and not a few, thousands of them. There's the Union of Russian Soldiers' Mothers have been talking about this very openly. It's on the internet, it's in the newspapers. Some of the soldiers are killed, their bodies are repatriated, they're buried. There's just so much evidence of it. And they will lie and lie and lie, claim they're volunteers. They're Russian soldiers who go there. Sometimes they call it leave, but they are Russian soldiers fighting in Russian army uniforms with Russian army issue weapons. And where do they get the weapons from? Even the Ukrainians are pro-Russian. They get their weapons from Russia. Oh, these are weapons left over from before the breakup of the Soviet Union. Some of these are post 1991 manufacture, and in 5 years of conflict, they didn't run out of ammunition. They get it from Russia. East Ukraine borders only one country. The Ukrainian government isn't going to give them the weapons. They get it from Russia. So it is mind-boggling. I'm just baffled that the Russian government will tell these lies even when they look utterly ridiculous. But we know how Trump operates. Just bare-faced lying. That is his go-to move. His modus operandi is deny, 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 and then move on. Barr behaves like he's Trump's personal lawyer, not the US attorney. I think you hit the nail on the head. The other thing is because Trump totally fails to distinguish between public and private, what's good for me personally and what's good for the country. And you're not supposed to use public officials who are paid by the taxpayer to do your bidding in a personal capacity. That's why there's the emoluments clause. He mustn't use the presidency to profit. He gets his salary, that's it. But then he's got his hotels. Foreign governments are staying in his hotels, hosting events there. Why? Why has business picked up? To curry favor with him, because they know it works with Trump. If you're making him money, there'll be payback, and he will use public resources to help you, which is why he has the US military go and stay in his hotels, why he routes things so far out of where they should be to help his hotels. Like there's this airport near one of his golf resorts in near Glasgow, which is about to close, about to go bust. So he has the US military use it to make more money for it, hopefully keep the airport open, and therefore his golf resort. Or in Ireland, Vice President Mike Pence staying in his hotel 180 miles away from Dublin, despite having to go all the way across Ireland to do the event and all the way back to the hotel. Usually, American VIPs in Dublin stay in the US ambassador's residence in Dublin, which is very safe, very secure. In Phoenix Park in Dublin, you can see people coming from miles off. Anyway, so there's this almost non-stop, flagrant mendacity by Trump and so many of his officials. And he set the tone for them. all these brazen untruths blazoned forth every single day. Anyway, just occasionally he'll blurt out a damaging truth, saying, "Yeah, I did order the Ukrainian government, demand the Ukrainian government investigate Joe Biden." Do I think Vladimir planned and helped Brexit and Trump like the Western media? I don't think that Putin was involved in Brexit. I could be wrong. I believe there are investigations about it. Sir Nick Clegg, former head of the Liberal Democrats, Deputy Prime Minister, Sir Nick Clegg, the Europhiles Europhile, educated at the College of Europe, MEP, absolute extreme Europhile, and he now says, having investigated it, that there was no Russian interference. Weaken the UK, some people would strengthen the UK, but I don't know that. Anyway, so for sheer shamelessness, Trump takes the biscuit. It's galling, but it's all transactional. Everybody's got no ethics. There's no consistent. There's no policy. I want to maintain national security. I want to assist Ukraine or not. Doesn't actually care one or the other. I don't believe in climate change, or I do believe in climate change. It's not about believing or disbelieving anything. It's about him. It's egomania. More money for me, more aggrandizement for me. So it evokes shades of Al Capone. No wonder he was mobbed up, buying all his cement from Fat Tony Salerno, a mobster. Now, I'm not saying that Trump was involved in bank robberies or drug dealing or anything like that, but just he decided to suck up to the mafia in New York because he knew that would benefit him. So notice how Trump finds such a soulmate in Vladimir Putin, and he gushes over Kim Jong Un. Again, it is sickening. No other U.S. president would praise such a vicious tyrant to the hilt, whilst Trump was also so insulting towards Democratic leaders like Theresa May and Trump interfering in British domestic politics, favouring Boris Johnson to be Conservative Party leader and therefore Prime Minister. How would you feel if someone did that about his domestic politics? So Trump wants to gull the gullible and somehow manages to beguile some people. The ethnically insecure, he plays on white anxiety. So some dimwits fall for these blatant lies. And so much of it is to do with the Ukraine situation. Now, the cradle of the Russian state is Kiev, now the capital of Ukraine. And there was Volodymyr, who was their leader there, except in Russian it's known as Vladimir. And then he decided to become a Christian. He received missionaries from various religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, two versions of Christianity, Orthodox and Catholicism. He didn't like circumcision. He didn't like giving up alcohol or going without pork, and he didn't like fasting at Lent, so went for orthodoxy, the least burdensome. And then he demanded his people all get baptized in the Dnieper, the river in Kiev. All right, that's that. Now, in Russia, for example, religious propaganda is not allowed, as in missionaries. You can't stand out on a street handing out leaflets. You can't stand there singing religious songs on the street. You can't try and persuade anyone to join your religion. How are you to be in a religion? Brought up, thank you so much, William, but I don't want my voice to be orgasming-inducing for a man. So how are you persuade people to be in a religion? You have to be brought up by your parents. So if you want to change, well, you have to go to the church or the temple or whatever yourself. But it's legitimate. I mean, so Putin, you would have jailed Jesus Christ, I suppose, Christian missionaries. And now, oh, you're oh so Christian. It's just fetish Christianity. It's just nationalism for him. I mean, what happened to the love your neighbor and mercy and generosity and helping the poor? You wouldn't find any of that in Putin any more than you find it in Trump. So it is despicable the way they exploit religion like that. Anyway, so then Poland became mighty in the 15th century and conquered what's now the Ukraine, split from Russia. So the Russian language emerged identifiably about 1,000 years ago. Was Russian originally closer to Ukrainian than it is now? Which one's the original one? I don't really know. Certainly Ukrainian's got some Polish accretions. Just Russians borrowed words from French and German and possibly other languages, well, even English. But maybe Russian is close to the original language. And I was very disconcerted to find some anti-Ukrainian bigotry in Russia and disdain for the Ukrainian language, like it's not even a proper language, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, is a Slavonic language. Yes, it is Ukraine related to Russian. That doesn't mean that it's not a proper language. It's definitely different. So Russian speakers, they can understand a lot of Ukrainian. They certainly can't understand all of it. Like, oh, for Spanish is similar to French, so Spanish isn't a real language. That would be absurd, okay? Or, French grew out of Latin, so it's not a real language. Languages change, they develop, they have children. They're all proper, respectable languages. And some people in Russia, not all of them, some, that's a crucial word, are just bigotedly anti-Ukrainian. I remember in Russia speaking to someone in Russian one time, and the guy looked at me like this, asked me where I was from, okay, and I said, oh, I thought you were Ukrainian, because my accent's off in Russian, I make grammatical mistakes. So even though I'm from a Western country, they were far happier with that than me possibly being Ukrainian. And so who's Ukrainian, who's Russian, it's difficult to say. Obviously then Russia conquered Ukraine, it became part of the Russian Empire. It's very unclear who's Ukrainian, who's Russian, especially in eastern Ukraine. Many ethnic Russians moved in, and people are of mixed ethnicity, and the Ukrainian language was discouraged, had no official status under the Tsar, and became more of a countryside language, and much more in the very west of the country, which is part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. To 1918, they got much better deal from them, and then that was that. So some ethnic Ukrainians started to speak Russian, or sometimes couldn't speak Ukrainian at all, but that doesn't mean you regard yourself as Russian. I'm Irish. I cannot speak Irish, but I definitely am Irish. I am not English, even though English is my mother tongue. Same as in the Ukrainian. There's some people who are native Ukrainians. They cannot speak Ukrainian. They can only speak Russian, but they're definitely Ukrainian. Now, increasingly since independence, they've learned to speak Ukrainian. The Ukrainian language never completely died. So they surnames often ending in ski or enka. Hello there, Joanne. The Cold War, well, obviously there is a new Cold War. It's not as bad as the old one. It's never going to be as bad because there's much more social intercourse going here, going there. We know each other. We know we're all human. Yes, I am proud to be Irish. I'm very fortunate to be Irish, actually, because we've achieved just so much. Not wishing to be rude, but there's some countries that haven't achieved very much. I appreciate you speaking on how lawyers must not bring the dishonor to the profession. Ah, you're a JD. Okay, exactly. They mustn't drag their profession's reputation through the mud. There are already a lot of snide remarks about lawyers being incredibly dishonest and engaging in double dealing. And then Barr, he's just the worst. He should be the gold standard for lawyers. He should lead by example, being Attorney General, and not just be a shill for Trump. Anyway, so back to the Ukrainian situation. Yeah, Ireland's a cultural superpower. Anyway, so there was a Russian Revolution, and Vladimir Ilyich Lenin said the other nationalities, the Ukrainians, Azerbaijanis, whoever, they can go independent. If they want to stay with us, that's welcome, remain united with Russia, a voluntary and honourable union. But most of the Ukrainians said we'll go our own way. There are other reasons, because the Tsar previously had said orthodoxy, nationality, autocracy. Well, a lot of people don't want to be under a dictatorship, an absolute monarchy, and he's suppressing the Ukrainian language. They want to keep their language going, and a lot of them are not part of the Russian Orthodox Church. There's a Ukrainian Orthodox Church. There's also the Uniate Church in Ukraine, which is nominally Catholic, as in the Pope is the head of the church, but they still have Orthodox theology and liturgy. So that was that. So all sorts of reasons to go independent. And they are a different language, a different ethnicity, a different culture, very similar to the Russians, not exactly the same. I'd have a strong view on this. If they want to be united with Russians, fine by me. They don't have to split. But anyway, so they did declare independence. Did most Ukrainians want that? I don't actually know. I suppose so. A Rada, a parliament was elected, and the Bolsheviks then decided that was wrong. They attacked. There were some Ukrainian Bolsheviks who said, let's unite with Russia. But anyway, the Red Army attacked with this particular viciousness, as I say, not just killing enemy soldiers in combat, but killing civilians in absolutely huge numbers. And the Cheka came along, the secret police, beginning their bloody reign of terror and torture on an absolutely massive scale. So what's the next step? So finally, so Ukraine was forcibly integrated into the Russian Empire. The Poles had also attacked, And it was very unclear where's Ukraine, where's Belarus, where's Russia, because what we now call Ukraine was several different provinces under the Tsar, and some were clearly Ukrainian majority, others didn't. And which ones of these should be part of Ukraine, which ones shouldn't? And the Poles, remember in 1918, Poland came back into being after 100 years when it disappeared off the map. The Polish national identity had always existed and the language, but remember there'd been the third partition of Poland. And the Poles said, let's look back to our halcyon days, the zenith of Poland of the 17th century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, when Poland stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea, and they attacked into what's now Ukraine. But they was defeated by the Red Army and pushed back all the way to Warsaw, and it seemed like the Poles were going to be completely wiped out. But there was a miracle of Vistula, right outside of Warsaw, where the Poles won. The Red Army was pushed back. Polish independence was preserved, but Poland included the very west of what's now Ukraine. Anyway, so the Soviet Union was set up in 1922. Ukraine was part of that. And I've been to Kievskaya Station in Moscow, and you see all these murals and these dedications from Lenin to friendship between the Ukrainian and Russian peoples. Well, then be nice to them. Let them do what they want. If they want independence, let them have that. If they'd like to use their language, their primary language, let them do that. It's not friendship to take away their rights. And I know Russians have their rights taken away by their government as well. But if you are non-Russian, it's even worse. Because too ardent an expression of your identity or language would meet with severe repression. Anyway, Stepan Bandera was one of those who'd fought for Ukrainian independence. Some of these Ukrainian independence fighters went abroad, so Ukraine suffered oppression like the rest of the Soviet Union. But their language was allowed to flourish in the 1920s. Then in the 1930s, the Soviet government changed its mind and said the language must be discouraged. I'm not going to talk about Vice President Pence. I already mentioned that. And the Russian became the primary language of instruction in school and elsewhere, and the Russian and the Ukrainian language was very much disapproved of and hardly ever printed, but it didn't die out. The Second World War came along. Well, sorry, I mustn't skip over the 1930s. 1932, a famine broke out in the Ukraine, and the Soviet government was beginning this collectivization thing, trying to industrialize, taking huge amounts of food and selling it abroad. And the Soviet government controlled everything, controlled the whole economy, owned everything. There was no private ownership, controlled really every morsel of food, every shop, every factory, and all the railways knew exactly what was going on. It was a surveillance state. It's a police state. It was a control freak state with the secret police in every village. And the Soviet government was extremely well clued up, and they knew that people were starving to death. It's at least hundreds of thousands of people died in the first year. At the end, about the lowest estimate is about 2 million people who died. There have been ridiculous estimates as high as 20 million, but that's just not true because that'd be the entire population of Ukraine. So there's no need to exaggerate. Tell the plain truth. It's horrific enough. And by making these bogus claims of inflated figures, that just is grist to the mill of the denialists. So millions of people died of starvation then. It was entirely avoidable. This is a time of rapid economic growth, and it was all government controlled. With some other famines, governments could say, nothing to do with us. We didn't give food. We didn't take food. We were not involved in the business of food. We didn't own the farms. In the Soviet Union, the Soviet government did controlled absolutely everything and knew precisely what was going on. But the Soviet government denied, as usual. Again, no matter how absolutely overwhelming the proof, they will deny. And they wouldn't let people out of the Ukraine to seek food. They wouldn't allow food aid in, and that was that. So it was all their fault. And the famine was almost entirely preventable. Even if some people were going to die, it would have been a fraction of that. Almost all of those lives could have been saved. So it was just absolutely staggeringly inhumane cruelty which brought this about. And you can see why the Ukrainians have every reason to hate the Soviet government. Not the Russian government, the Soviet government. There were some Ukrainians in that central government. Was it an anti-Ukrainian thing? I don't think so, totally. That might have been part of it. Some Ukrainian priests, are sort of living oracles of Ukrainian culture, were killed in huge numbers. The NKVD, that was the Soviet secret police, they went around, and there were some wandering minstrels in Ukraine, blind men who used to sing for money, begging for alms. And nobody robbed them. Who would harm a blind man? That would be the lowest of the low. But the NKVD, for some reason, suspicious of them, tortured them horrifically and murdered them. These are just crimes screaming to heaven for vengeance. There was also a similar famine in Kazakhstan, and indeed in Russia. So they all suffered, but the Ukrainians perhaps more heavily than the others. And so then when the Second World War broke out, you can imagine why Ukrainians thought, well, it couldn't possibly be worse. The Soviet government has lied to us time out of number. We don't believe a word they say. They say the Germans are evil. Well, that's probably another lie. It can't be worse than Stalin. They had every reason to hate his guts. So some of them welcomed the Germans. Finally, Christianity was going to be allowed back. Remember, Christianity was savagely persecuted under the communists. Vladimir Putin was a communist, thinks communism is great, and being a Christian is great. You can't be both. He's an absolute despicable time server, would just serve any government, no matter how villainous, will say anything, will do anything, has no bottom line, has no soul. But anyway, as we know, the Wehrmacht turned out to be monstrous, and large numbers of Ukrainian civilians were killed, and they were given starvation rations. And so, you had to cooperate with the Soviet government, you're going to get killed. You had to cooperate with the Germans, you're going to get killed. And if you did, when the Red Army came back, you were going to get killed. I just don't know how anybody survived. And that was the main battleground in the Second World War. And so many Ukrainians were killed. That's why even more ethnic Russians moved in right after the Second World War. Anyway, so some Ukrainian nationalists were active there, Stepan Bandera amongst them. Some were very viciously anti-Polish. Now, I'm from the utmost Occident, and it seems odd to me, but Ukrainians and Poles, you're almost the same. Your languages are quite related. Why would you be against each other? You often have ski Ukrainians, that Polish suffix or ska, if you're a woman, to your name. But then it's a bit like saying Irish and English. From an Eastern European perspective, you might say the Irish and English are almost the same. What's the big deal? Why are you squabbling? It's a bit like Mikhail Gorbachev when he was leader of the Soviet Union. He was flying back from the US to the Soviet Union, and he touched down in Shannon Airport in Ireland, and he met with Charlie Haughey. And he said to Charlie Haughey, who's Prime Minister of the Republic of Ireland, why are you always rowing with the English? Because after all, you Irish and English, you're both ruled by the same Queen. And you can imagine the look on Charlie Haughey's face, like, he did not like that one bit, because obviously Gorbachev had been briefed, but had misunderstood it, this potted history of Ireland. The Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland didn't grasp the distinction. And because to him, in the grand scale of the Cold War, the Northern Ireland conflict was petty, and that the Irish and the English are virtually the same. No, I don't mean British and Irish. I know exactly what I'm saying. English and British are not the same thing. The Irish people, we are British ethnically, culturally, and so on. I know most people in the Republic of Ireland are not British citizens. Much though people deny it, we are British in many ways, even though we're no longer part of the United Kingdom. Fast forward, well, Chernobyl was there. That was another horrific disaster. Again, I don't think it was an anti-Ukrainian thing. Were they more negligent because it was Ukraine? I don't think so. I could be wrong. And there was some Ukrainians who were very much accepted in Russia. Some Ukrainian peasants, just because they were successful farmers, have been deported by cattle truck to Siberia in the 1930s, suffered monstrously. Our image of this of Nazi Germany is these Jews herded into cattle trucks and sent off to concentration camps. We should have the same image of the Soviet Union, not extermination camps, concentration camps. Although, yes, the Soviet government did deliberately kill millions of people by starvation or by shooting them dead. But was it genocidal? I don't think so. Maybe I'm splitting hairs. It wasn't an attempt to wipe out the Ukrainians as a whole. A significant fraction of them died. I don't think it was particularly anti-Ukrainian, but again, maybe I'm blending off the Soviet government too easily. Compared to the Irish famine, nobody denied there was starvation in the 1940s. The UK government didn't deny that people were dying in their hundreds of thousands. If people wanted to leave Ireland, we could leave, and we did. If people wanted to send food and money in, that was allowed. So obviously, far better situation than what was going on in the Ukraine. Anyway, so 1991, independence was declared of Ukraine. They all agreed that yes, there would be independence. The Soviet Union was over in the autumn of 1991. They all recognized each other's independence, so it was absolutely legal. And staggeringly, you have some Russians who say, "Oh, it's illegal." Russia agreed to it. You recognize them just like they recognize you. All right, Russia's not independent; it's still part of the Soviet Union. But remember, Russia wasn't independent either. Anyway, so Ukraine had nuclear weapons, as did Russia. But Ukraine was persuaded to give up its nuclear weapons in return for security guarantees from the United States, the UK, and other countries. And the Ukrainians are very generous with the Russians. They allowed the Russian Black Sea Fleet to stay in Crimea. And of course, all the assets should be divided up. You know, Russia is about 50% of the Soviet population, so presumably should have 50% of the warships, 50% of the money in the bank, 50% of the diplomatic buildings abroad. I don't know if they did divide it up like that. A bit like, you know, India and Pakistan were partitioned. So India got something like 70% of things on the basis of its population. Anyway, so that was that. And it was very tough times for Russia and the Ukraine, even tougher for Ukraine. Russia kept the ruble. Ukraine had to set up its new currency, the hryvnia, and there was hyperinflation. But they were mostly speaking Russian and gradually brought back the Ukrainian language. It was never died away. Its co-official status became more and more important. But there's some Ukrainians who are my age who don't speak the Ukrainian language at all. Anyway, 2004 election. It was Yanukovych versus Lukashenko. So Yanukovych, he'd been in prison in the 70s for various crimes. He was very, very much backed by Russia. Lukashenko, because he was pro-Western, he was poisoned. Now, I can't prove that it's the Russian government, but I've never heard another plausible theory as to who else it was. Who would want him dead? The Russian government? Obviously, because he said, let's join the EU and let's join NATO. So he had to die, but he survived. Very good-looking man who was terribly disfigured by that poison. And obviously, poison is Russia's method of choice for assassinating foreign leaders. But I'm sorry to say, it's just typical incompetence. Didn't even manage to kill him and leave their fingerprints all over it. A bit like with the Skripals, didn't even manage to kill the guy and just leave so much evidence that it was them. But people say, is their method of their madness? They want to scare you? No, I think it's just sheer bungling. So always full marks for effort, not for achievement when it comes to the Russian Secret Service. And despite large-scale cheating by Yanukovych, Lukashenko won, and there was an attempt to get him through, but to keep Lukashenko in, keep Yanukovych in, but Lukashenko eventually took office. It was the Orange Revolution, a peaceful revolution, people power. They were not going back to oppression of free speech and so on. Other things about that election, obviously, Ukraine is very much dependent on Russia for oil and gas, getting oil and gas transits Ukraine through pipelines onto Western Europe. Transit fees are paid, and there's some cheap oil and gas for them. And obviously, Russia will threaten to cut it off if the Ukrainians don't do as they're told. But anyway, eventually Lukashenko did win an election, and should have been in jail for cheating the election. But this is how fair they were. Such lenity, obviously a mistake. And he was very unpopular. There were large-scale protests. Remember, I think it was February 2014, the police in Kiev shot dead 100 people. Admittedly, there was some violence on the other side. I think a few police officers were shot dead as well. And Yanukovych, he fled to Moscow, where he remains to this day. Poroshenko came in. I know there's some dispute, is he a legitimate president, but that's that. But he's recognized, even Russia recognizes him. Otherwise, don't have an ambassador there. Make it mind up. And then just after that, Russia invaded Crimea. These men arrived from Russia, speaking Russian, in Russian army uniforms, insignia removed, with Russian army issued weapons, and Moscow denied and denied and denied that they were Russian soldiers. And then suddenly, with great fanfare, trumpeted that they were Russian soldiers all along. Just an absolutely outrageous lie. So they go for masquerade, as they call it. That was an example of it. Disinformation or lying, and do things quickly. The world will take some time to respond, but by then it's too late. You've already got facts on the ground. Possession is 9/10 of the law. And the thing is, because we like, say, the presumption of innocence, Western governments say we've got to have proof positive. It can't be a probability, it's got to be a certainty. And because there's a scintilla of doubt, the Russians will exploit this. Because we can't prove it 100%, they'll say there's no evidence at all, even where there's plenty of evidence, but it's not absolutely waterproof. Well, I'm trying to get on with my script, Robert, rather than constantly responding to questions, because it really disrupts the flow for other people who may be watching. So Crimea was seized, Donbass and Luhansk were seized as well. Now, these are areas in the very east of Ukraine, bordering Russia, with large Russian ethnic minority, and who's Russian, who's Ukrainian, is not very clear. Some people growing up in those areas would have regarded themselves as Russian. Even those who weren't ethnically Ukrainian would have spoken Russian more than Ukrainian, even exclusively. And then the conflict started, people having to choose, and that was that. So they were invaded. There were attempts to seize Berdyansk, Mariupol, Odessa, these various ports, but they all failed. It's very difficult. So, yeah, I'm from Cork. Anyway, the Ukraine is not a very rich country. There was quite high unemployment, so they really relied on arms and funding from Western countries, NATO troops. NATO troops not going in there, but they're nearby in Romania, in Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and so on. So Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are very worried. They were part of the Soviet Union once. They've got significant Russian ethnic minorities, and Putin could try and play the same game and say, oh, I have to liberate these oppressed minorities. And he's the one who's really oppresses ethnic minorities. We don't hear very much about what is going on in the Caucasus, having this cruel tyrant in Chechnya who says there are no gays in Chechnya, but gays should be killed, so I'll kill anyone who insults Putin. And it's no idle threat, who uses torture on a huge scale, Ramazan Kadyrov. Boris Nemtsov was Deputy Prime Minister of Russia back in the 90s, a very gallant man who genuinely believed in democracy, in free and fair elections, in a free media, and fair trials. No more militarism, no more megalomania, constant wars. A really decent and humane guy who paid with his life for his decency. But he released a dossier several years ago, proving chapter and verse on Ukraine, all the evidence. Look it up, Boris Nemtsov's dossier on Ukraine, that yes, the Russian army invaded, and there's just so much evidence. And they set up these things, so the People's Republic of Donbass, the People's Republic of of Luhansk, the Russian-occupied areas of eastern Ukraine. And a lot of the leaders of these places are not Russian, so are not Ukrainian, were not born in the Ukraine, were never Ukrainian citizens, and actually never lived there. In the last 5 years, they've moved and they've taken over. They're open about their identities. So many of the top people there were certainly served in the Russian army, if don't serve even now, and they're very open about it. So it's just absolutely obvious that this is an outrageous example of Russian aggression, of breaking international law. And then Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has the nerve to say that adherence to international law is a core principle of Russian foreign policy. Or there are other flagrant lies saying that Ukraine had agreed to never join NATO, which is a lie as well, that they never did. They have the right to join NATO. Russia's trying to join another alliance. I know Ukraine joining NATO might come across as threatening to Russia, but Russia's not just threatening to the Ukraine, it's actually invading it and lying about that. Now, a small man isn't going to start a fight against a weak man, against a strong man. Ukraine wasn't going to start this fight. Russia started this fight. And so there are a few very decent, very morally courageous Russians who recognize this is totally wrong, like Boris Nemtsov. And Russia is the largest country in the world, has such a vast territory. It doesn't need more land. Why don't you just sort out real problems like, pay off the national debt or better public services or diversify the economy? Why do you do that? Instead of grabbing more land, you just don't need no land. It's not a threat. NATO's not going to attack you. You've got nuclear weapons. Germany couldn't conquer the Second World War. NATO doesn't want a war against you. So just stop it. Stop the megalomania. And I know Western countries like America make some of these mistakes too. But anyway, so it's sickening what Putin is doing. And let me triply underscore this. I'm not remotely anti-Russian. I don't want anyone to be mistreated for being Russian, being any ethnicity, or being the citizen of any country. There's a lot about Russia I admire, like its classical music, its architecture, even its cuisine. So I would like peace. I would like people to respect each other's borders, the conflict to end, which with the illegal occupation of Crimea, Donbass, and Luhansk to end. The Ukrainians bent over backwards to recognize the identity of ethnic Russians in those areas, and Russian citizens were allowed to live there. And Crimea had Russian as its primary language as part of the Ukrainian state, and they used the Ukrainian language and the Tatar language as well. And that was that. And people were using Russian quite a lot in the eastern regions. Now, if Ukraine has now made Ukrainian the sole official language of Ukraine, you might dislike that, but they are allowed to do it. The sovereign state is allowed to determine its own language policy, just like Russia is allowed to determine its own linguistic policy. Even if it was wrong-headed or unfair policy, they're allowed to do it. The Russian government throws a wobbly if anyone says anything about their domestic affairs, but then they're constantly sticking their fingers into Ukraine's domestic affairs, saying you must do this, you not do that, and then have the nerve to claim that it's a domestic conflict in Ukraine when it's not. There are some Ukrainian citizens who take Russia's side, it's true, Russia has invaded, and that's why they have all those weapons and all those thousands of men. So at least 13,000 people have been killed in Putin's illegal war of aggression. If he had declared war, and that would at least tell the virtue of honesty, but he hasn't. But if you kill someone and it's not a war, that's murder, isn't it? So he's done that. There we are. Anyway, it's despicable. It's sad. Maybe some sort of compromise could be worked out, but obviously this is making crime pay. Even there was autonomy for the regions already, even more autonomy, change of language rights, promising never to join NATO, something like that. So there. That's and Ukraine, they need the military help because they're not a very rich country. They couldn't afford all these weapons just to hold their own, to try and regain some of the territory. But this is a problem that Russia would like to go away. The sanctions have hit their economy, and then the government was telling these blatant lies, whining about the sanctions and saying they've helped their economy. It is true they have helped a few sectors of it. If you're producing things in Russia, you can sell them for more than you used to be able to. But for the average consumer, it's hurt them. Of course it's hurt them. Otherwise, you wouldn't whine about it. Counter sanctions haven't hurt Western countries very much. And as though Western countries are doing this for no reason. They're doing it because one country has invaded another, and crime must not pay. You're right, Russia could beat the UK, definitely. It has got the numbers, and they're willing to suffer, which the British are not. So that's that. Then you should thank the West for sanctions. And I had this Russian pupil who was saying that he would like nuclear war. The Americans should all be killed because of their sanctions. I mean, words fail me as to how evil that is. We have sanctions, so you can punish another government or even a whole country without killing anyone. Just hurt them financially, achieve some diplomatic change, bring about justice without physically harming anyone. We don't have to trade with other countries. You're not obliged to sell to anyone or to buy from anyone. So sanctions there, you're just exercising your right. Anyway, there we are. That's enough for me. Trump and the Ukrainian imbroglio shows Trump has disgraced himself yet again. I was shocked but unsurprised. Really, nothing would surprise me for this absolutely vile fiend. So please support me on Patreon or on PayPal, even better. If you find me, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. I need donations to sustain the channel. And hire me as a tour guide. Book lessons with me online. Okay, good night.